a very good Friday to you, Angola. Good afternoon, Gabon, Ghana. Good afternoon to you, Senegal, Nigeria. Good afternoon, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. I'm Thami Ngubeni. This is where you get the African perspective. It's where we meet to look at the latest in news, sport and business. Our first stop this afternoon is the news desk, where Jwalane Tulo Mwape is standing by with your latest news.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Top stories: Asawa Mali authorities arrest several top military officials and warnings of a possible civil war in Lebanon. Good afternoon. Malian authorities have arrested several top military officials, including a French national, over an alleged plot to overthrow the government. Among those were Generals Abbas Dembele and Nema Sagara, as well as a French citizen, Yali Vizelia. Reports say that more than 30 soldiers and officials were in custody. Butlali Pele has the story.
Mali continues to face deadly attacks from different armed groups in the north and central regions of the country. Authorities have arrested several top military officials and a French national of the alleged coup to destabilize the government. Mali President Assimi Goïta was granted a 5-year renewable term in June, with political activities suspended nationwide. Mali recently cut military ties with France and has turned to Russia for support. Authorities say that the situation is currently under control.
Sudanese officials are warning that civilians are dying from hunger in the southern region of Kordofan. Fighting between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces has intensified there in recent weeks, which has stopped people from farming. The politician Siddiq Tawa, who was in Sudan's unity government before the 2021 coup, told the BBC that the cities had been under siege since May.
In Kordofan, especially in South Kordofan, Deleng and Kadugli, it's a real catastrophe. The main roads have been totally blocked. So the cities of Deleng and Kadugli especially have been by siege for a couple of months. So nowadays in the markets and the stores, there is no any amount of food.
The U.S. State Department says its relationship with South Africa remains disturbed by the conditions in the country and discrimination experienced by racial minorities. A spokesperson for the state was responding to a series of questions from SABC News about the Department of International Relations rejected its South Africa country report on human rights practices as inaccurate and deeply flawed. They said their reports address human rights issues objectively, whether they arose in countries that are adversaries, allies or partners, and that they are summaries of factual observations. Sharon Bryce-Pease reports that specific questions posed to the State Department were not addressed in their response.
SABC News provided the DIRCO statement to the State Department inquiring as to whether there'd been any engagement with the South African government prior to the release of the country report, and asked them to respond to concerns raised by DIRCO about the human rights deficiencies in the United States. A spokesperson responded that President Trump had been very clear about his concerns on the severity of violence in South Africa, and that the country needed to take tangible steps to condemn and address these egregious problems.
The BBC has defended its investigation into child sexual exploitation in Kenya after the government described it as a hoax. Speaking in Parliament on Wednesday, Interior Minister Kichuba Mekomen described the documentary as fake. Mekomen added that the victims interviewed by BBC Africa Eye were posing as children. However, the BBC argues the documentary was clear that those interviewed were adults recounting experiences of abuse that occurred when they were underage. Mekomen defended the Kenyan government's record on protecting children, saying it took cases of trafficking of minors seriously. And finally, the leader of Hezbollah has warned the Lebanese government's push to disarm the group could plunge the country into civil war. The BBC's Mike Thompson has the story.
Under pressure from the US, the Lebanese government has ordered the army to devise a plan to disarm Hezbollah by the end of this year. The policy has sparked a furious reaction from the leader of the group, which was better armed than the Lebanese military before its bruising war with Israel. Naim Qasim warned that the government would bear responsibility for an internal explosion and destruction of Lebanon that could leave no life in the country.
Recapping the top story, the Sawa Malian authorities have arrested several top officials, including a French national, over an alleged plot to overthrow the government. For any news stories you would like to share with us, please do send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I'm Cholani Tulongwebe.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, the men's tennis players will pocket $18.3 million in profit-sharing bonuses for 2024, while Brentford have agreed a club record worth $62.5 million for forward Dango Otaro. Details of these and other stories coming up at the bottom of the hour.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
It is a very good Friday to you, Africa. Here's what we've got on your business agenda today. Nedbank are making a huge sale. They've sold off 21.2% of their shareholding in EcoBank, and they've sold this for a really handsome price of $100 million. We'll find out who they've sold it to and the reasons behind that sale. And in South Africa, the much-anticipated national dialogue kicks off. We'll be speaking to our reporter, Dimakatso Lushuru, who's been covering day one of this national dialogue. It's gone exactly 7 minutes after 4 p.m. Here's an open invitation for you to engage with us on our various social media platforms. On X, Instagram and YouTube, you'll find us at Channel Africa 1. On Facebook, we are at Channel Africa.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African Perspective.
This is where we begin this afternoon with Dr. Nkechi Owu from the University of Ghana. Says that in both South Africa as well as Ghana, a significant portion of the workforce, and particularly women, remain in the informal sector, where labour protections, benefits as well as job security are limited or, in many cases, entirely absent. She made these remarks during the presentation of a joint Ghana-South Africa research project titled Gendered Aspects of Economic Security. That's currently underway at Stellenbosch Business School in South Africa, where key policy recommendations are also being shared. Channel Africa's economics reporter, Innocent Simosa, has more.
The project, developed in partnership with Stellenbosch Business School, the University of Ghana, and the Levy Economics Institute, aims to highlight the structural barriers that limit women's economic participation and security in both countries. During her presentation, Asima Sina shared the gender gaps between South Africa and Ghana.
So overall, the gender wage gap is more severe in Ghana. So this is what we're seeing here is the female to male ratio. A higher ratio means less gender gap. So there is higher gender inequality in Ghana because of the lower female to male ratios there. And that holds for kind of all levels of percentiles that we see of wages. So if we were to move from none to severe deprivation level of job quality, we see that the earnings follow a downward shift. So these boxes, the red ones are women and the blue boxes are men. Both of these are if you see there's a sort of a negative relationship as we move from none to severe level of deprivation.
Dr. Nkechi Owu from the University of Ghana says earnings and the degree of deprivations weakens employment relations.
The focus is on job quality. It will be important to include an income or an earnings dimension. If you look at other existing work that has been done by the ILO and the World Bank in this respect, the current focus doesn't include an income dimension when you look at the construction of job quality. So it may not be fully capturing this concept if that is what the focus of the researchers is. And since, even though there might be a concern that wages data isn't always available, I think later on wages are imputed. So perhaps as a robustness check, we can have another job quality index.
Ajit Zacharias is a senior scholar and director of the Institute's Distribution of Income and Wealth Program says there's a significant gap within jobs in Ghana.
What the research is showing is that for the gender gaps, you can see that the total difference, which is the D, is the sum of the numbers shown in the intra-job and the composition numbers. So for Ghana, we have an interesting result that there is a significant gap within jobs between genders, but that's being offset by the composition effect. Whereas in South Africa, almost all the gap is driven by the composition effect. Finally, turning to the inter-country gaps, we can see that the difference between either South African men and Ghanaian men or South African women versus Ghanaian women is generally driven largely by the intra-job effect. That is, if you pick any industry occupation cell, the women or men in South Africa perform better in terms of job quality than the Ghanaian.
For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Samos in Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa. AUSISA, the Association of Water and Sanitation Institution of South Africa, is a platform uniting Africa's water professionals. This November, Africa leads the conversation on water and sanitation. Join global and African leaders at the AUSISA Africa and Global South Dialogue 2025 from the 9th till the 12th of November at the Emperor's Palace, Johannesburg. From policy innovation, this is where action meets collaboration for a water-secure future. Register today at ausisa-watersan-dialogue.org or follow at AUSISA on social media. AUSISA, working together for sustainable water and sanitation security in Africa. Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
It is exactly 13 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Who's buying, who's selling? South Africa's Nedbank Group has reached an agreement to sell its 21.2% shareholding in the Pan-African lender Ecobank for $100 million to the private investment vehicle of financier Alan Nkoncho, Bosque Investments Limited. In a statement, Nedbank says the sale marks the conclusion of a significant chapter in the bank's journey with the Togo-based Ecobank Transnational Incorporated, or ETI, in advancing its Pan-African mandate. But for more on this, we joined this afternoon by Keegan Higgins, an investment analyst at Encore. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon, Thami. Thanks very much for having me.
Perhaps let's start off with an understanding, Keegan, of what some of the reasons behind Nedbank's decision to sell its stake in Ecobank are, and why now?
I think that's a very good point. And if you were to look at it just from a regular investor's perspective, sometimes investments don't go to plan. I think that's what sums up ETI. They went into the Nigerian economy, or broadly Pan-Africa, and things just didn't play out the way they thought it should. And I think that's a function of probably two parts. The first is that they only own 21%, as you pointed out. And that means that Nedbank was limited in terms of what they could actually implement. So they couldn't take their plans that work in South Africa and just copy and paste it across the African region. They were limited by what the other 79% of the shareholders wanted to do. So I think that's the first part. And then secondly, the regulators across African regions were potentially going to require a further capital injection, which would have meant Nedbank would be investing more and more cash into the business. And they were quite certain that that's not what they wanted to do. So if they didn't continue adding capital, they would have been diluted further and fallen below the 20% minority stake mark.
And how long did this investment, this relationship actually last? Do you believe it was given a fair chance in order for it not only to, be cemented in the region, but to be able to make any sort of difference?
I think that's another good point you make there. The relationship's been going for over 10 years, and they initially invested, I think it was about 6.3 billion rand. And over time, from Nedbank's perspective, they've only realized a return of about 400 million rand in dividends. So from an accounting return, it's not really yielded what they were hoping for. So I think after a 10-year plus period, you sort of look at it and you think, could I put that capital somewhere else?
And talking about capital, there's $100 million here, which is the amount that this 21.2% shareholding has been sold to. Does this represent a fair valuation for their stake? And perhaps while you're doing that, maybe let's compare it to other valuations in similar transactions too.
I think that's a very good question to ask in terms of the valuation and the multiples applied. From Nedbank's perspective, when they reported their results last week, they were holding EcoBank or ETI on their balance sheet at about 1.8 billion rand carrying value. So you convert that to dollars, it looks like it's exactly the $100 million that the transaction's gone through at. And in terms of the valuation multiple, it's been quite tough to apply something that's normalized because the earnings that they've achieved from ETI and from their associates have been very volatile. I mean, just in this last half alone, associate income was up over 80%. So I think any multiple you try and apply on that would be quite distorted by recent moves.
You mentioned this in an earlier comment when you spoke about perhaps a refocus for Nedbank. There's a statement that was issued by the group's chief executive, Jason Quinn. Now, he indicated that the sale represents a reset of Nedbank's strategy on the rest of the African continent, with a clear focus then being on SADC and East Africa regions. How is the bank doing in these regions?
That's a good question, and I think it's a tale of two parts. I mean, if you look at, say, Standard Bank's results this morning, African regions, when you do the business well, the returns are fantastic, and that's something that can carry this business going forward. So like you rightly mentioned, once they dispose of ETI, Nedbank will be purely left with the SADC regions, and then following the strategy reset, they'll look to move more towards East Africa. And again, that's a comment that was mentioned this morning in a call with the management team of Standard Bank, just how attractive the East African economy is actually looking. So there's a lot of countries, say countries like Kenya or Ethiopia, that are looking very attractive. So, I mean, only $100 million or just under 2 billion rand. In Nedbank's life, that's not material, but I think it's a start. So if they do start looking at a few opportunities, maybe some of these countries are welcoming and looking to increase their foreign presence, I think that's where they would potentially go.
The impact of this, Keegan, could be far-reaching. What do you believe this says as far as confidence is concerned in African cross-border banking investments? Because this, as you said, is not one that has worked out for Nedbank.
I think it's when you go into investing, you play the odds. Some investments work and some don't. I think in this case, it was really just unfortunate timing. There are a lot of things that took place in Africa. You've seen various other countries pull out of certain investments. And I think that's the story, really, is that where people have tried, and like you said earlier, they gave it a bit of time. They gave it almost 10 plus years, and it just hasn't unfolded the way it should have. But I think it's not to write off Africa. Africa is a very attractive investment destination, and companies are recognizing that more and more. So you're seeing, like we said, the push towards the East Africa. I think it does talk a lot about Africa as a whole, but it shows that there are pockets of growth. When you look at the South African economy, there's been no significant growth taking place recently. But if you look across our borders and further up the continent, there is growth. But there's optionality and there's opportunity for these banks.
And talking about opportunity, we've really been discussing this from the seller's perspective, Nedbank. But there is a buyer, Bosque Investment Limited. What value might they add to EcoBank in comparison to Nedbank and the role that they played? And why were they keen to acquire this 21.2% shareholding?
I don't really want to try to talk on behalf of Alan, but I think his experience at ETI, I mean, for the listeners that aren't aware, he was a non-executive director from about 2015 to 2024, and then he became the chairman of ETI in 2020. So I think he's seen what this business can be, and under his investment vehicles, he can maybe position or tweak things in a way that suits his mandate. Whereas I think for Nedbank, investors were asking them for more returns to try and be more like-for-like with some of their competitors. I think it was really probably mixed mandates in terms of what Nedbank's investors wanted versus what Alan and Conchu want from his investment vehicles.
The word culture comes to mind as I speak to you, Keegan. And business cultures and corporate cultures in many instances have a lot to do with where they're geographically located and perhaps where the majority of their shareholding is being held. Is that something that you maybe would care to comment on, looking at the differences between Nedbank and Bosque Investments?
So I don't really want to go too far into cultural differences. I think Nedbank is a bank that's been around South Africa for a very long time, and it's adapted to the South African culture, the South African community, and more importantly, the South African investor base. And then if you look out towards, say, Bosca Investments, that's a very different investment vehicle, and it's probably it's able to be a lot more active. I can't imagine that they have to report to the listed shareholder base every 6 months to tell them how an investment's doing and be put under the microscope frequently. So I think that's maybe the one thing that separates it, and that's why you've seen a lot of focus on private equity deals in the last few years, is companies feel more comfortable being owned by an unlisted entity because they're not constantly under the microscope.
All right, Keegan Higgins, thank you very much for great commentary and insight there regarding this sale and what the future looks like as far as EcoBank and its composition is concerned. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Have a good evening.
Have a great one. That's Keegan Higgins. He's an investment analyst at Ancor. He takes us to exactly 22 minutes after 4 p.m.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
Now, Standard Bank, moving from one bank to the other, or a number of banks, but still staying within the banking sector, they've confirmed that Group CEO Sim Shabalala is set to step down by the end of 2027, together with the Chief Financial Officer Arno Dankwa. In a statement, the bank provided clarity that the recent decision to raise the retirement age for executives from 60 to 63 would not affect the pair. For the 6 months to the end of June, Africa's biggest lender by assets reported a 10% increase in headline earnings per share. The half-year results were led by growth in the corporate and investment banking unit, and this is despite a tough operating environment. SABC News economics reporter Nosipo Khatebe has more.
The bank welcomed the half-year performance despite negative sentiment in South Africa's economy, weighed down by tensions with the US and uncertainty over the national budget process. CEO Sim Shabalala has highlighted the corporate and investment banking unit as their standout performer after it delivered a robust set of results with headline earnings up 16% to 12 billion rand.
So we're lending to corporates, and these corporates were doing activities associated with energy, logistics, non-bank financial institutions, and so forth. Secondly, slower growth in our balance sheet arising from consumers, principally home loans, vehicle and asset finance, and unsecured lending.
Shabalala also explains that the bank has been busier with local clients.
A large part, though, of the fees and commissions and non-funded revenues came in the nature of great activity in South Africa, where we're doing more with our clients, a larger customer base, resulting in fees and commissions growing by about 11% in South Africa.
He acknowledges that consumers, particularly the lower LSM bracket, have been under pressure after years of elevated interest rates, despite the recent cuts.
As you go up the wealth structures of the country, people are doing better. There's less difficulty with people paying their loans at the top end of the market. But even there, people are starting to find it difficult. We've noticed that people are drawing down on their two parts. They are withdrawing their savings in order to repay their loans. So there's a tough one. However, in the case of Standard Bank, what we've seen a combination of people benefiting from the declining interest rates. We've seen people benefiting from sustained jobs, particularly at the top end of the market.
Bad debts have slowed down, which is showing up in the credit loss ratio of 93 basis points. Standard Bank's South African business delivered 11.6 billion rand in earnings, with its Africa regions that include Angola, Ghana, Kenya and Nigeria contributing 9.7 billion rand. Nosipo Khatebe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Gender-based violence is destroying lives and tearing communities apart. It happens in homes, in schools, at workplaces, and too often in silence. But it doesn't have to continue. If you see it, speak out. If you are hurting, reach out. Because doing nothing is not an option. Listen to all 19 SABC radio stations from Wednesday 23rd of July for Hard Talk discussions, advice, dramas, educational shows, and interviews around GBV with experts, survivors, lawmakers, and the whole country affected by gender-based violence. For all your favorite SABC radio stations, call 0800 428 428 to report abuse or get help. GBV, it ends with you. This message is brought to you by the SABC. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 26 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. The three-day ICAO Next Generation of Aviation Professionals Global Summit concluded on Thursday. This was in Durban, South Africa. Now, some of the delegates' wish list for the future is for funding to be available to aviation training institutions, particularly those that cater for marginalized communities, as well as collaboration among countries globally and the private sector, as well as the sector leveraging on technology. Channel Africa reporter says Ezechalo has been at the summit and has more on the story.
The summit brought together important role players in the aviation sector from senior to junior levels, who included academics, governments, training institutions, even youth representatives themselves, who are expected to be the drivers of the sector in the future. Delegates wrapped up the three-day event, and their hope is that it is not just another talk shop, that deliberations will lead to the success of the industry. The Embro Group, a diversified tourism, hospitality, aerospace, training and trading group, operating in some few countries in the African continent, was also represented in the summit. Among the work that they do is pilot training and tour operations, with a focus of developing rural air access. The group said that their focus aligned with the summit. The Chief Executive Officer Murad Ismail has his wish list from the summit. He shared some of them with Channel Africa.
Human development, in other words, skills development and retention of those personnel. So that is a couple of focuses looking at that specific issue. We also have to ensure that we get modernized in terms of the new AI integration into our thinking, and not to be scared of the AI, but to encompass it and also understand it, because sometimes people misunderstand how the AI is supposed to work. Your AI requires you to put in good quality data and good quality thinking for the machine to do its job. The other thing is there was a sentiment about the youth. Sometimes the youth are impatient. You know, the older people take a bit longer to do things. The youth are used to a high-speed gratification. In other words, do something, get the results straight away. Aviation, by its nature, is highly regulated due to safety constraints, and by that very nature, it requires you to be very cautious how you set up systems and SMS type systems and so on, and quality assurance systems. So you have to be a little bit more patient when you set it up, and you get a better result if you do that.
The East African School of Aviation from Kenya was also part of the summit. The director of the school, Sarah Waitiki, says progress will come if you have looked back at where you come from, such as the summit's aim being able to address workforce challenges in the aviation industry. She adds that the sector is facing a skills and labor shortage, and something should be done about it. One of her other takeaways is collaboration.
One of the actionable points that has come up very, very strongly for us as a training institution is to ensure that we partner with industry and other institutions to ensure that our training programs are in alignment with the needs, the skills needs in the industry. And so that is a very good takeaway for me, that as we develop curricula to train the next generation of aviation professionals, we must ask the industry, what are your needs? What is the skills gap that exists within your area of operation? So we are able to come up with programs that meet that particular or fill that particular skills gap.
She also would like to see companies and governments being intentional about funding aviation training, as it does not come cheap.
Governments must provide scholarships for students. especially the needy students who are also bright from very marginalized societies. They must provide scholarships, must provide funding, so that we don't just inspire people or young people to come into the industry, but we also sustain them, help them to train and get, fulfill their dreams. Many needy people are not able to access the industry because they don't have the funding, they don't have the money to pay, and training is not very, very cheap in aviation. And so we need to have a deliberate effort, all stakeholders from government, civil aviation authorities, other industry players, all coming together to support the young people to get funding to join the aviation industry.
For Channel Africa, I'm Sisi Sekhalo in Durban, South Africa.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
She takes us to exactly 4:32 Central African time as we head over now to the market desk, where Nosipho Zuma is standing by with your latest market indicators.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. In your business indicators, the SAWA, $1 is trading at 17 Rand 53 in South Africa, and Botswana is trading at 13.3. In Namibia, it is trading at 17 Namibian dollars 53. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 23 kwacha to the US dollar. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 475. In Ethiopia, it is trading at 139 birr 836. In Uganda, it is trading at 3,000 shilling 540. In Tanzania, it is trading at 2,000 shilling 562. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 533. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 48 Egyptian pound 326. In Tunisia, it is trading at 2 dinar 877. In Algeria, it is trading at 129 dinar 162. In Morocco, the dollar will cost you 8 dirham 988. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 912 for Kwanza, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,870 to the US dollar. Now, for any business news stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nosipho Zuma.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
And for the business of sport, standing by, here is Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thank you so much, Thami. Very good afternoon from the sports desk. Well, profit sharing helped push ATP player compensation to a record $261 million for the 2024 season, for a total of $378 million when combined with Grand Slam prize money. So the men's elite body added that it would, and rather was on track to deliver more compensation records, including $28.5 million in Challenger Tour prize money, as well as a $3 million in ATP 500 bonus pool. Now, the expansion of most of the Masters events to 96 player draws had increased earnings opportunities for players, also widening the number of those able to make a sustainable living from the sport. At the same time, onto this story, Brentford have agreed a club record deal worth about $62.5 million for Bournemouth forward, that is Dango Otwara. Now, the 23-year-old is also set to travel to London later on today to undergo a medical. Sources close to the Otara camp told BBC Sport that he wanted to leave, having not had a prominent role at Vitality Stadium. Now, the Burkina Faso international scored 9 goals in 37 appearances in all competitions for the Cherries last season. Nottingham Forest also previously held an interest in the player, but they have also agreed a $57.5 million with Ipswich Town for England under 21 winger Omari Hutchinson. Now, Brentford found themselves, Brentford themselves had a $55 million bid rejected by Ipswich Town for Hutchinson just last month. It also remains unclear whether Otaro's arrival will pave the way for striker Yaone Wissa to leave the Bees before the start of the season. Well, Los Angeles 2028 Olympic as well as Paralympic Games will, for the very first time in the Games history, allow venue naming rights, unveiling Comcast as well as Honda 7267.7 as inaugural partners in a move aimed at boosting commercial revenues. Now, the pilot program developed with the International Olympic Committee, IOC, will let qualifying LA 2018 partners retain existing venue names during the Games and also buy additional marketing assets. It also opens naming rights for up to 19 temporary venues to worldwide Olympic partners as well as the LA 2028 sponsors, while the standard clean venue rules continue for non-partner sites. Now, Comcast will now lend its name to the Comcast Squash Center at Universal Studios, where squash will make its Olympic debut. Honda Center in the Los Angeles area will also become the first arena to keep its name during an Olympic competition, hosting the indoor volleyball competition for the 2028 Olympic Games. Well, that concludes your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Alternatively, give us a call. The newsroom line is +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
The SABC is pleased to announce the launch of the new self-registration platform. Vendors wishing to do business with the SABC can self-register on our internally developed platform. Vendors are able to access this platform on our website, which is https://www.sabc.co.za/SABC/ under e-tenders, or you can self-register at https://etender.sabc.co.za/, and from there you can simply follow the prompts. Visit SABC's social media pages for more details.
From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 4:39 Central African Time as we turn our focus now to the very much anticipated national dialogue in South Africa. It's aimed at assessing the country's 30 years of democracy. Its objective is to identify the country's challenges and also work towards a prosperous future. This has kicked off today, being day one. Now, in the days leading up to the start of the dialogue, several foundations as well as political parties withdrew their participation, citing concerns over its implementation and rushed timelines. In his opening address, the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, called on all South Africans to take part in the national dialogue process. For more on this, we're joined on the line by our reporter, Dimakatso Leshuru. A very good afternoon to you, Dimakatso, and good to have you with us this afternoon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we understand that ahead of the President's opening address today, there was a scuffle that broke out. What exactly was happening?
Yeah, I think there was a misunderstanding about the actual event today. There were people who were invited who thought that this was the actual dialogue, and they weren't clear that this was a start towards having a dialogue. So when one of the panels started and was being constituted and people being called, they weren't called, and they felt that they were being left behind until it was explained to them that this is a start, and the breakaway sessions. so they will get an opportunity to speak. It was quickly resolved.
And who were those individuals who were disgruntled? Were they identified?
They weren't identified. I mean, remember there were over 1,200 delegates there, and a lot of them coming from civil society and different backgrounds from across the country. So I wouldn't say I know exactly who they are, but I know that they felt that they were part of the minority groups in South Africa, and therefore, felt that the people that were being called, they had no representative from their group.
Right.
But as I say, it's something that was resolved. There were about 7 breakaway sessions this afternoon, so everybody will, up until tomorrow, get a chance to speak,
And take us through the heart of the president's address today.
It was very, even with regard to the issue you mentioned about the foundations that have pulled out, very conciliatory, in the tone of Ramaphosa, thanking them for the work that they've done thus far, and saying that, he hopes people, will, even those that are out, will come back and talk, saying that, the only way we can resolve our problems is to talk about them, But at the same time, he had questions which were puzzling, given that President Ramaphosa and the ANC had been in power for so many years, asking about, why is it that things are the way they are? Why is it that black people, the majority of black people are still living in poverty? Why is it that we're seeing women earning less than men? And not really giving answers, but you would assume that he, being the president, and prior to that, being the leader of business in government, in President Zuma's government, cabinet, he would have those answers. But I suppose he was setting the table for, or the theme or space for people to talk about those issues. But as I say, one would assume that these are the things that the government would have been working towards, because they're not new, they've been existing for a very, very long time.
And how was this address received by the delegates? And I guess what was their general reaction to the dialogue?
It was well received. I mean, it was a very jovial mood when he declared the convention open. But, Thami, not everyone is happy about the convention. There were some, I must admit, a lot of, the majority of people that I spoke to were for the dialogue, right? But they were skeptical about issues like whether government will try and hijack this thing and make it an ANC thing. We are going towards elections. But there were some on the political side, political analysts who were saying that they are not in support of this, especially one professor, Stewart Before, saying that he was not in support of this. He doesn't understand what is it that they are intending to do, because if you wanted to see how people feel, you could engage the services of the Human Sciences Research, as an example, cancer research, to speak to one university and go and do research in the very rural parts of South Africa and get a sense of what is it that people are looking for. But then I spoke to one representative of Business Leadership South Africa. She's a well-known chief economist of Citibank in South Africa, Gina Schoeman, who made the point that, even though there was business, academics, and those people who are usually at the table, this dialogue, the way it's been set up, will give people who are usually not at the table to have their voices heard. And she was making the point that given the outcome of the elections, it shows how frustrated people are about their plight, that they don't have a voice, they are not being heard. And she was saying that even though this will not have any significant impact in terms of economic matrix, because she's an economist, she looks at data, it won't have an impact on that, right? But in terms of the social capital, in terms of getting people talking, in terms of giving people hope, this will assist.
You talk about this hope, and it has a price tag. The price tag for this process of getting this hope was sitting at around $42 million for this national dialogue. Has that cost been revised down following the concerns that were raised? And as I mentioned earlier on, there are some foundations that withdrew, and this hefty price tag was some of the reasons why some of them did.
Yeah, you see, that's been a bit of a thorny issue because even today the president tried to address it. But as you know, Thami, there is no set figure, right? Even the, I'm not sure what it is when you turn it into US dollar, but the 740 million rand that was bandied about, the president said he was not happy with that. He wanted it come down, but he hasn't said to what. We know that for this weekend, the budget is around 80 million rands, and we know that that's being picked up by NEDLAC. And NEDLAC, we know, is financed by the Department of Labor, which is financed by government, so government is paying for this. And hence the skepticism of those legacy foundations that you're referring to, because they are saying that because government is footing the bill, therefore they feel perhaps entitled to play a bigger role, and this is a dialogue that is meant to be citizen-led. But at the same time, I spoke to a leader of Rise Mzansi, Songa Sizidi, who's also the chairperson of SCOPA in Parliament, and he was saying that, listen, we can't have a dialogue that happens without any leadership, because at the end, we need a government or somebody to take the outcomes of this dialogue and put them into something, whether it's policy, whether it's a document, anything to move it forward, then to have some sort of implementation of that. So there are arguments on both sides, but to what extent that involvement of government should be, I think, is the question and the worry of those foundations. And also, we've spoken a lot, we've heard at least a lot about corruption and how finances have been mismanaged. And the concern is how much of money that was perhaps allocated to other things like water, like education, health, will be rerouted towards this. But, Skuman made the point that it was a minuscule amount if you look at South Africa's GDP. It's a small amount to get, I guess, people feeling good about the country. I mean, that was a point that Ruth Mayer made. You remember Ruth Mayer was one of the architects of our constitution. Mm-hmm. And, I actually had goosebumps talking to him because he reminded me of that time with Mandela and then when we were young and looking forward to this beautiful country working out. And he also remain hopeful, saying that, listen, even though things have gone the way they've gone, we have to have hope. We have to at least try and get people to be heard. Whether anything will be done about that is a different story. But for now, is to get South Africans on the table to at least say what they want to say, speak about their pain, about their dreams, about the reality, the South Africa that they may now realize, envision, dream about now, which is obviously a little bit different from then at the advent of democracy. There are lessons learned now, so hopefully, yeah.
I must say, Dumakas, as we wrap up this afternoon, next 2 days, the launch of the dialogue. But what then? What is the process that is to be followed in order for this to reach its end and conclusion?
So tomorrow is day 2, and they'll be choosing a steering committee which will then be the one that will lead the actual dialogue. So because right now it's going to go from this weekend, which was a kickstart of the dialogue, it's going to go into cities, communities. So there'll be they're planning to have at least 3 dialogues per community ward. They're planning to at least have about 10 million people speak. So this steering committee will coordinate that, and then it will, should result in an actual national dialogue event where all those, whatever that they've garnered from all those town meetings and whatever it is, will be put together, I suppose, into some sort of document or whatever. And then we'll see what happens, Thami. We don't know.
Well, we hope there's something that's going to happen, Dimakatso, because you know what? There's, as I said earlier on, hefty price for hope and lots of talking, lots of strategizing. But can we just see some action here? Can we go beyond the hoping and the dreaming to something implementable that will actually affect and impact the country?
We live in hope.
And, as you say that, I'm reminded of it was during the Obama election where Hillary Clinton said Obama is just feeding people hope. feeding people false hope. And Obama responded and said, there is nothing false about hope. And that's how I'd like to leave our conversation this afternoon, Dimakatso Leshuru. Thank you very much. We certainly will be having and hearing a lot more from Dimakatso as the national dialogue continues. She takes us to exactly 4:51.
From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Hello, Africa. Tell me how you're doing. Victor Khumuswana joins us this afternoon as we do our weekly business roundup. He is author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. He's also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo. However, today he joins us from day one of the National Dialogue. Good afternoon to you, Victor.
Good afternoon, Thami. I tell you, the view is amazing. If you're not optimistic from the top of the UNISA building, look, you are hopeless. Wow.
I know that beauty can inspire hope. I guess it's the perfect setting to be having the type of difficult conversations that are going to be had as far as the country is concerned. So, Victor, just really quickly before we get into the day's business stories, your view and your takeout from the national dialogue thus far.
Yeah. I know it's been criticized. There's another talk shop. Unfortunately, Thami, it doesn't matter how militant you are eventually going to have to talk. And South Africa at the moment is facing challenges, socioeconomic stagnation, the transformation that's not quite translating into better life, an economy that's not inclusive. That's a recipe for disaster. Talk about crime, gender-based violence. So South Africans have to find a way. I don't think it's about knowing the kind of South Africa they want, because I think we know what we want. But it's about agreeing the triggers, the things that can detonate the right kind of change. And that's what I'm hearing. The approach here is, what are the obstacles that are standing in the way of access to what we need, and what interventions do you think we need to engage in, and what conversations further should we have? So it's almost like what is not working, what is working, and how can we get what is not working to work. I am hopeful, I'm optimistic if we make the conversation really people-based, but most of all, Thami, from the conversation that I saw, the dialogue that I saw in Rwanda, people of authority must be in on those conversations. It mustn't be conversations by ourselves and then we write reports, because then it's their own work. But people of authority should be facilitating. I'm seeing ministers here that are I'm in the same group with the Minister of Energy, so you see lots of the ministers who are participating in this. I'm hoping that we bring that authority when it happens, so that we don't waste time talking amongst ourselves, but we're talking to people who can make the changes that are required.
Very, very much needed. An important composition of these dialogues. So Victor, let's take a look then first at Zimbabwe as we round up the business on the continent today. We see the gold rush intensifying there. How are the labs dealing with this influx?
Well, they are not dealing, Thami. That's the word you heard, the young people. They can't deal, because production has gone up 40% in the first 7 months of this year. And in April, if you remember, gold reached $3,500 per ounce. And with the expected 40 tons that will be produced in Zimbabwe, Craig Harvey, who is the Vice President of Technical Services at Caledonia Mining, these are mines in places like Rwanda, in the Matabeleland area, they are saying even their profits went up to 34.8 million in the first half of the year. So the companies are doing well, but unfortunately, the demand for testing diamonds, gold and all that is too high. The reason is simple, particularly for gold. When Donald Trump started causing all the trouble, the geopolitical tensions with Russia and Ukraine and all the things that create uncertainty, when they take root, people run to gold because it's considered to be a very good storer or preserver of value, and that's why the price price has gone up. Also, you remember Zimbabwe created that Mushiwa Tunya gold coin, and they are using their gold-backed currency, and that means now gold has to be verified, the reserves have to be refined and purified and kept in good nick. So that's why the labs are not coping. It's good because then it means you will get the capacity to be increased. Maybe neighboring countries like South Africa and Zambia will be able to be brought into the. But at the moment, the labs are not coping.
Well, it's a gold rush in Zimbabwe and an oil rush for Nigeria, surpassing OPEC's target for the second consecutive month.
Yeah, look, I like the way they're doing it. 1,505 barrels per day that they are producing. They went to 1,507. Because remember, they do this too much. If they exceed too much, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, is going to penalize them. The general production across all OPEC nations went up by 330,000 barrels per day. But at least Nigeria is managing to keep it just above the quota, and making sure that they take advantage of the shortage that might arise. But also remember, they have that refinery, that Dangote refinery. So the glut, whatever is left in the market, will be able to be absorbed by the refinery. There's no longer a crisis there. So the largest producer of oil in Africa with 1,507 in June, barrels per day, followed by Algeria at 937,000 barrels per day. So there you have it, Nigeria top of the pile.
Very good news for them. We thought the world and the global markets were starting to stabilize as far as the U.S. tariffs are concerned, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. New sanctions by the United States. Who are the culprits this time, or who are the targets?
Thami, you can't use stabilize in the U.S. when Donald Trump is president. The man is the antithesis of stability. Oh, no. This time, remember the Rubaya, the area in the eastern of the DRC where there are lots of mining activities, some of the mining products flowing into Uganda, flowing into Rwanda, and finding their way, I must add, to Dubai, because we mustn't leave the destination of these minerals out of the equation. But the executive order 13413 that was announced, John Hurley, I think the name is John Hurley, who is the Undersecretary for Treasury for Terrorism and Intelligence, he's saying that executive order is going to have to be put into place and activated to contain the rise of trading in conflict minerals. Unfortunately, there's a conflict there because these minerals go into the same smartphones and tablets that are manufactured by American companies, among others, including Hewlett-Packard, Apple, and all that. So it's a real contradiction in terms, because the U.S. is imposing sanctions on the one hand, but its companies are unfortunately continuing to manufacture using cobalt that's coming from the DRC.
There's a phrase for that, Victor, as we wrap up this afternoon. It's called double standards. That's what it is.
Exactly.
That's
and
what
it works very well if you are the largest economy in the world and you're the president who couldn't be bothered.
That's how we wrap up our business roundup for today. Victor, always a pleasure. And you continue that hope which springs eternal at the National Dialogue. That's Victor Khumsana, author of Africa Bounces Back and Africa is Open for Business, taking us to exactly 4:59. Annika Longi, what's on your plate this afternoon?
Alors, chers auditeurs, tout à l'heure, nous parlerons de l'Afrique du Sud qui a entamé ce vendredi à Pretoria 2 jours de la Convention nationale. Nous parlerons également du Niger où les poursuites du bras de fer entre les syndicats de la magistrature et les autorités du pays se poursuivent. C'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. And that's how we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa in Business. From myself, Thami Ngubeni, and the team, give yourself a splendid evening further. Over now to Vue d'Afrique.
On Open Views Audio Bouquet.